Welcome to the International Montessori School Facebook Live session. This is our third Surviving and Thriving session that we've been running here for parents of toddlers and preschoolers. So my name is Matthew Snade. I'm the Director of Pre-Elementary Programs here at IMS, and I'm here today with Jen Yu.
Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer. I'm a AMI trained 3 to 6 Montessori guide. I was a teacher and curriculum leader here at IMS for 7 years, and now I proudly wear my parent hat. My son Benjamin is in the IMS Foundation class, and he is 2.5. And I'm particularly excited about today's topic because he's gone through a language explosion himself, and we're finally seeing the rewards of 2 years of work.
Right, good. So we're coming to you live from the Aldrich Bay campus. It is a Facebook Live session. If you have questions during or at the end, we'll try to get to those and give some advice or our thoughts on whatever questions you may have. The topic for today is language and emotional development. So sort of both together, a little bit of the language that you can use as a parent to support your child in their emotional development, and also how you can help to promote their language development, which will in turn support emotion. You sort of see how these things link together as we get into it. So specifically, we are going to be talking a little bit about social resiliency and progression. We'll sort of do a little bit of role play so you can see what a grace and courtesy lesson looks like. If you know about Montessori, you've heard about those. We'll also be talking about very difficult emotions, maybe even a tantrum or when a child is really struggling. So the language that you can use, how you can prep them for that, and just a little bit generally about the importance of a solid language environment, how that really helps a child to adapt to their space and also to classify and sort of cognitively develop. And then we're also going to touch on, if we can, some growth mindset language. And so that's about having your child be really have an optimistic frame of view, sort of tackle problems head on, and how you can sort of get your child on that pathway and not be an impediment. Often as adults, we're unwittingly impediments to a growth, to a growth mindset pathway. For those of you who have joined us before, so in March we sort of talked more generally about surviving and thriving at home with the toddler, especially with all the social distancing and et cetera that's happening around the world these days, certainly here in Hong Kong too. So you can look back on our Facebook page if you're interested in that sort of more broader topic. In April, we talked about some of the big challenges. We talked about meal times, bedtime and sleep, and we also talked about toilet learning. So if you have interest in that, you're welcome to go back and look on that. And then just a little bit of a heads up, coming up on June 4th, I believe is our date, our next Thursday date. We will be diving into sensory motor development. And if you think of it this way, if you sort of think in your mind, why is my child always trying to move? Why can't they settle? Why are they always touching things? Why are things going in their mouth? Why are they, what's all of this about? Why are they so exploratory with all of their senses and so focused? And so we'll get into some details about what that's about, how to support that, and really it's very much part of a natural process, and so we'll discuss that. But let's dive into today's topic. So to start with, when we sort of think in general terms, from a Montessori perspective, when we look at younger children, we sort of tell parents not to use baby talk. Okay, which is so really to expand your vocabulary with children. So can you explain a little bit, Jen, about why we would take that approach? Why not talk down or baby talk with a child?
I think it all goes back to respect. So we respect the child even though they're little and tiny and can't do much aside from eating and sleeping and crying. We do treat them as an intelligent being from birth. And that's really important, and our language can convey so much of that respect. And so from when they're born, we speak to them as if they are intelligent beings. And if we look at child development, as Maria Montessori did, she scientifically observed children in their development. We know that children acquire language universally all across the world if they are spoken to. And so they learn the language through interaction with us, the family members. And they get the material for their own language from our language.
Right.
And so there's no need to dumb down our language if we are to be the material. In fact, if we understand that they're in this sensitive period where they're intensely focused on developing their own language, we should give them the highest quality language possible,
Absolutely.
the best material that you can provide your child.
Yeah, and there's a couple of pieces to that. So one is your child always understands a lot more than they're going to be verbalizing, through these early
Absolutely.
years. So again, you might sort of think from their output, well, I need to keep it at the level that they can speak. That's not it. Cognitively, they're going to be taking in a lot more, and they're in this stage of what we would call, in Montessori terms, an absorbent mind, and just this neuroplasticity where they're taking in everything from their environment. So you want to give that rich, for you, whatever your native language is, environment where they're just encountering all of these new words.
In all its complexities.
Right.
So avoid absolutely the baby talk. So we're talking about your whittle, or your, be specific with your language. It's not just a pig, it's a sow, it's a boar,
Right.
Those are piglets. That accuracy really helps them to classify the world that they're taking in
Right.
through their senses. That's also a sensitive period order. So giving them the specifics of that language actually helps them to better understand what's going on in their world. You mentioned how important that vocabulary development is. It's because children are developing the parts of their brain for receptive language. It actually develops far faster than the parts of the brain for expressive language. So by age 6, children are speaking about 2,600 words approximately, but they understand about 24,000.
Yeah,
so
about 10
imagine
times.
that difference. They understand far more than what they can express.
Yeah, or what they sort of commonly would use. And we will get into, we'll talk a little bit later about how to make some nice corrections for children, when they're going through that phase where they're not using tenses properly or
stumbling.
single or plural or whatever it is. We'll talk about that a little bit. But again, basically what you're trying to do is give as full and robust a language as you can. Every word for them is a new word. So instead of calling something a circular object, call it a sphere. You use the correct term for it, to the extent of your vocabulary, pass that right on. Okay, so activities that we can do to get children off on an early start with this language development.
You can do so much, and remember that the material comes from you. So you don't need to get your child into a special language class or buy flashcards or download that new app on your device. The language has to come from you. And it has to be used in that human interaction. So number one, activity, reading out loud. That's so important. Right now, the evidence continues to be overwhelmingly positive about reading out loud to our children. So much so that social scientists think that it's a predictor for the children's outcomes later on in life. And then reading nursery rhymes, poems, telling stories. So I like to tell stories about what I did during my day. It also helps with the empathy for Benji to realize that people exist outside of himself and that people are doing other things and have different feelings as well. So telling stories, just ordinary plain stories about how you went to work, how you took the bus, how you met someone new. They love those stories. And nursery rhymes, that pattern really it helps children. It's I read somewhere that children who know 8 nursery rhymes by the age of 5 are better readers later on in life. And they're a lot of fun. They're a little nonsensical, but they recite them just...
Yeah, the rhyme and the rhythm and all of
helps
that. I mean, children, of course,
comprehension.
are attracted to repetition. They like to repeat. So if that's part of the language that you're giving. A couple of pitfalls, as we sort of talk about this and sort of generally what's done for language development, people can sort of go off the rails, both in terms of, okay, I'm supposed to be giving a lot of vocabulary, but I don't know that much, so I'm gonna get sets of flashcards, or I'm gonna do something else outside of my daily life to really extend, okay? And you don't really want to go down that path because it's about living language, what's in context for your child. So you sort of go to the university level, so to speak, of language for what you have in your home.
what you can touch,
and what they can touch, what they engage, what's important to them, what they interact with, what they see you interacting with. So don't go down the road where you're bringing in a lot of outside stuff that's just two-dimensional exposure. That's not the most effective way for them to take it in. It's not fun.
It's not fun.
It's not fun. It's not applicable. And then the other side is don't go too far down the road of providing a lot of external audio-visual materials.
It has to be a human voice.
The human voice, them being able to see how you're pronouncing, them seeing your mouth and your tongue and all of that, and that it's a relationship-based. The need for communication is based on the need for relationship.
And
right?
I think, Matthew, that brings me back to an earlier activity that I'm thinking of,
Sure.
which you're all doing already, is just speaking to your child about what you're doing. We call it narrating in Montessori. In other early childhood methods, they call it sportscasting, a term coined by Magda Gerber, and it's just saying what you're doing with your child. Right. That's key, that you're doing an activity with your child. You can practice this from birth. I would say even do it when you're carrying your child, because the child in the womb is absorbing the sounds of the mother's voice, the rhythms of your daily life, and that development of speech can start so early, right from the very beginning.
You can be, changing an infant's diaper and describing, it looks like you might be wet. I'm removing your diaper. Let's unfasten the Velcro or the snaps.
The nappy cream? And imagine how many times you do a diaper change a day. Yeah. Very soon, if you're paying attention, you'll see that little infant. When you ask them, where are your dry diapers? They'll actually turn their head to look, because they've gone through this so many times. And exactly what you said, Matthew, about living language. It's got to be applicable. And what is more applicable than these intimate routines that you're going through every day?
And this cream feels really smooth and it's very bright
Sensory
white,
language.
isn't it? I mean, you're giving all of these words for what they're experiencing or what they see you experiencing.
Exactly.
And so that's all really important. Now, let's dive into the little piece about when they stumble, linguistically when they stumble. So these young children, when they start getting to a point that they're trying to string a few words together, they're trying to make sentences, but it doesn't come out perfectly, though they'll have it sort of worked out in their head. But how do we support that, basically?
Sometimes the words can't come out as fast as their wheels are turning. So stumbling is a very natural process too. What we don't want to do is discourage the child by telling them they said it wrong, or that's not how we pronounce it, and you didn't say it properly, say it again with me, because that's really discouraging when you're learning how to express yourself. And so listen, first of all, that's really important. And then there's a really simple way that we can correct the language by modeling it. So the more the child hears correct models of the language, the more material he has to use that later on. And even if he doesn't repeat it correctly right away, they have that stored in their absorbent minds. A quick example, Benji likes to say, "Me so excited, me so excited." And so I would say to him,
"Oh, you're so excited?"
Yeah.
Right?
You mean
you're very
so excited?
Yeah.
Like this.
So, yeah, it's just you basically just sort of recap, say it again, but not really pointing out that there's an error.
Right.
It's almost like you're just it's part of the conversation that you're giving that.
There was another one. Benji was in the flat and saying, "Where is you, Mama? Where is you, Mama?" Very common error, and that ended up becoming a game later the afternoon. Where
are you?
Where are you, kittens? Where are you, books? So I just kept saying this, where are you, over and over again. And it clicks very easily for them because they're in this sensitive period. That's the joy and beauty of the sensitive period, is that you don't need to correct it. You just need to model the correct use of language, and it comes out, it self-corrects.
Great. We have a question coming in related to this topic. So this is from Kirsty Lee. Thank you, Kirsty. So she's thanking us for advice. You're welcome. Our daughter is 18 months. She loves flashcards or isolated object naming. Okay. So when we do flashcards, pictures of animals, vehicles, weather, which she loves, but doesn't really have attention span for reading from books or nursery rhymes, and she'll wander away. And then
So thank you, Kirsty, for the question.
Sorry, I see. Oh, so she does like us to describe the pictures in the books, and we do sportscasting and stories of our daily lives, which she will stay for 2 to 3 sentences, okay? Should we be doing anything to improve her attention span for rhymes, stories, or books, or will it just come naturally? So basically, showing interest in language, showing interest if there's just a card or a simple object, but anything longer, she's tending to run off with or not stay engaged with. So what's the approach there?
Thank you, Kirsty, for the question. 18-month-old definitely starting to become very fascinated with the nouns, so the names of objects like you mentioned. I always recommend playing the game of just naming objects in the home and give her things that she can hold. Open up the kitchen drawer and pass her the whisk. And can you hold the whisk? What do we use the whisk for? Even better if you can actually incorporate it into a real cooking activity, because then it becomes tangible and an active experience. Yeah. That's great. I would try to err on the side of objects in the home, and you probably have so many. Open the stationery drawer, the toolbox, your closet. Give her those words first before the 2-dimensional flashcards. Yeah. She probably really likes the flashcards because often us as adults, we react profusely when children achieve something. So if she's repeating the name on the flashcard and everyone's delighted about it, then she understands very quickly that this is a behavior that we like. So name first the objects in the home because those are more applicable. It's difficult for a young child at 18 months to understand that that tree on the picture is actually the tree they see outside at the playground. So it's better if they can touch and feel, smell, taste even. And then with the reading, it's a habit that you can nurture. I would say start with very short books. Try to find books with real children. Babies love other babies. They're not the most common baby books, but if you look carefully, you can find them instead of talking animals or things that aren't real, that they can't see in their real life. And start with short books and read and model reading. So there may be times of the day when you practice reading in front of a child. A child who loves reading doesn't just come out of thin air. It really is from a home that nurtures that love of reading as well.
Yeah, and another element there, I mean, attention span, focus, you have to be a bit patient with that. That does take a bit of time, and you just sort of work with what's coming naturally there. Yeah. Don't sort of get frustrated with that. But I think the real aspect, and we'll get into this a little bit too, is about commenting positively on the effort or on the engagement that is there, and not being too concerned or using too much sort of negative or guiding language if she's interested in something else instead. Yeah. So it's a bit of patience working with that. Let's continue on through some of the topics. We have some more questions coming in, but let's get through a few of the other bits that we'd like to, because we don't want to keep you too long today. So we'd like to talk a little bit about our grace and courtesy lessons. So this is something that we do regularly within the Montessori classroom. Montessori parent would do it at home. And can you just tell us a little bit about what that's about, and then we're going to role play one for you as well.
Sure. So grace and courtesy is a core part of our Montessori curriculum, and it's the reason why our classrooms work the way they do. Parents, prospective parents, or other educators actually who come to observe our classrooms always marvel at how does it all work? How can you have 25 children doing their own activity and chaos doesn't erupt? And it's because of grace and courtesy. We start this from the first day they come into the classrooms, and they're very subtle lessons that we give over and over again. And the joy of this is that children are in a sensitive period for grace and courtesy in the first 6 years of life. They want to be so much like us. They want to understand why is it that we do the things that we do, and they want to be like us. Yeah. And that doesn't happen at any other time in your life. So take advantage of that. Grace and courtesy is all based on respect. So for myself, for others, and for the space that we share. Do you want to show it?
Sure. I'll just give a little bit more context there. It's all the sort of daily things in a particular environment it's the language that you need, it's the interaction that you need for things to go smoothly socially, basically.
behavior,
You know,
yeah.
it's that social
Pet,
connection.
sneeze.
And so when you're at home, just as we are in the classroom, you may come up with a new, if you see something that keeps happening again and again and it's a problem and
Yeah.
your child doesn't have the language for it, okay, let me give you. And so that's the example that we're going to use today. So, and this is something that parents might regularly experience when you're on the phone or you're talking to another person in the room, you're engaged already.
Working from home.
Right, especially working from home. But your child wants your attention, and so their impulse is just to come and burst in and interrupt. And it's just showing that there's a way that we can do that, okay? So I'm gonna give a little grace and courtesy lesson the way we might in the class and the way that you can do at home. So I'm gonna be dad, and Jen is going to be my young toddler-ish. Yeah, a little bit older, okay. I have to sit up taller then, I guess. And we're going to, I'm going to role model, as if Jen is my young child, how to interrupt, okay? So let's start, and hopefully it gives you a little bit of an idea. Jen, I'd like to play a game with you today. Can we play a game together?
I like games.
Okay. So, you know, sometimes when I'm on the phone or mom's on the phone or maybe somebody else is at home with us and we're talking, but you want our attention. And sometimes, you know, we don't give you our attention right away because we're talking to somebody. So I want to show you a way that you can get our attention and you know that we're ready for you to talk to us, okay? So we're going to play a game to do this, okay? I'm going to pretend that I'm on the phone talking to my colleague John, okay? And then you're going to pretend, are you ready to pretend? You're going to pretend that you want my attention. So what I'd like you to do is this. Put your hand on my shoulder, and then I will cover your hand to let you know that I've heard, that I know you want me. Think we can try that?
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to start pretending, okay? Yeah, that's what he was saying, but I don't know. I don't quite agree with that. I think we're going to have to talk about it at the next meeting. Do you want to maybe send off an email and just let them know that we should add that to the agenda? Yeah, I'm not sure. Okay. All right, so it's going to be it's 9 o'clock, right? Okay. All right, thanks. Okay, bye.
Dad, look at this. I made this.
I like the way that you put your hand on my shoulder and let me know, and you waited for me. Wonderful. What do you think of that? Okay. So that's a little kind of lesson that you can do, and don't worry about being too perfect with it. It's a bit of trial and error as you get to know your child. Maybe you have a go at it, it doesn't work very well, and think of a different way to frame it. But basically, there's a couple parts to it. One, it's best when you play this game not when you're in the situation. So not your child has burst in and you've been on the phone and you're like, okay, let's play this game because I got you to get this right. This is something you do at another time. You make a mental note, okay, I need to give my child the language or some action, something they can do. And then you play it at a different time, a time when it can be a little bit fun. And it's okay to dramatize a little bit. You know, I didn't go to, you will know your child, but they can, in class, often they really get a kick out of us role playing.
They love it.
Right.
It's very effective with an older child as well.
That's helpful
you
too.
can do it with your spouse.
Yep.
Benji loves it when William and I play this game,
Right.
and they love repeating it, which is their way of processing it.
And that's another thing. You can't do it once and expect that they've now internalized that
practice.
language or that, it's something that you play repeatedly. An older sibling or showing it with a child. I dove right in and asked her to play the role, which depending on the child would be too quick. And often I would then instead role play with somebody else and say, I'm going to be the child and let me show you how, and they see it that way. So those are grace and courtesy lessons. Okay. So this is from Sincere. Hi there. So grateful you guys are doing this again. Yeah, you're very welcome. What about talking to our little ones in a high-pitched, exaggerated, repetitive way, aka parentese?
Yes, hi, Sincere. That's what we mean by baby talk. So we want to try to speak as the way you would speak with your partner in life. So avoiding that unnatural pitch. I always try to think of myself traveling when you're in a foreign country. Does it help when someone is speaking in this high-pitched, abnormal,
Or louder,
exaggerated voice? Does it help when they use words that aren't useful? Like, it's not a piggy, it's a sow.
Or they're not hearing somewhere else.
Right, that's right. So also not making up words.
Yeah.
Not making up words. So it's not...
They have enough to learn already. Don't make up new ones for them.
It's not boo-boo, it's the bottle. Be
Right.
specific and as accurate as possible with your language.
And so one of the pitfalls there is, as children are acquiring language, they say a lot of things that are very cute and very endearing.
Yes.
And there's a tendency to want to make that part of the family lexicon, and which you can do some of that, but if they also always get the feedback that when I say things in a silly way or when I say things wrong, I get more attention from my parents,
Right.
As opposed to we're just having a conversation, and then there's no reward to just have a conversation or just use the regular words. So that's what you have to work about a little bit.
That thirst for words, the thirst for language is already naturally there. We are wired that way. It doesn't need to be exaggerated. And you can save that for when you're doing storytelling or when you're reading out loud to the little 18-month-old and you want to get their interest.
Okay.
Move on?
Let's move on, and then we'll come back to this. We have another vocabulary question. We'll come back to that in a moment. Okay. So the next piece that we want to get into, we've talked about the grace and courtesy, sort of talked about expanding the vocabulary. We want to talk about the difficult emotions a little bit, because there's a lot of language pieces to that as well. So the terrible twos, not so terrible twos, the terrific twos, the tantrum, the sort of emotional overwhelm, dealing with that situation, supporting that situation.
Well, I think it's important to first realize that it is very developmentally normal. These are children who are emotional creatures. They feel these big feelings, but they don't have the tools to manage and deal with them. That's what all of childhood is about. They are also impulsive creatures. So they react because that's what they're in that developmental stage where they don't have the abilities to stop and think and consider what type of choice they're making or what behavior they're about to do. When they want it at that moment. And so that regulation of emotion it has to be practiced over and over again. So the tantrum is really a cry for help, I see it as. And if you can wrap your head around this idea that when your child is at their worst, they are really crying out for help. They are not trying to make your life difficult. They are not. Don't take it personally. If you can understand that, then you may be able to set up yourself in a position to guide them to get back to that thinking brain, we call it. Dan Siegel, who wrote The Whole Brain Child, an excellent book if you haven't read it, he talks about how children go from this reactive state when they're in the fight or flight mode. He uses this hand model to show the brain. And in that state, you are overwhelmed, you are flooded emotionally, and they need our assistance to get back into that calm, focused, alert state where they can learn, basically. And so that may look different in every household. So for our household, it's stop, take a deep breath, and ask for help. So the most magical words you can teach a 1-year-old, 1.5-year-old, help please,
Right.
help me please. And that can be used for many different situations. With the tantrum, hopefully, if you're using language to label emotions,
Right.
hopefully you can label those emotions of usually frustration, anger, disappointment. If you can catch that earlier on, if you think of a pain scale from 1 to 10, if you can catch that at a 2 or 3, then you're not going to get to the 7 and have this explosive tantrum.
Because they're starting to understand, oh, I'm not in this alone. They know where I'm coming from, as opposed to it builds, and then it really explodes.
By simply naming that big feeling they have, you're acknowledging that this uncomfortable thing in me that's coming up
Yep.
is something to be named, and it's totally okay. So naming it in a non-judgmental
In a
way.
non-judgmental way,
really
exactly.
important.
You want to be fairly neutral about it. You don't want to tie it into, oh, that's what happened last week, or this always happens in this, or it's because you're too. Don't bring in a whole bunch of other things. Just keep it on. Is this? I see that you're feeling this right now, or is this what you're feeling?
Yeah.
Is this, is it because of this? Is it, you're just trying to help them walk through to get a bit of a sense for themselves of where they are and why they're there. Maybe you're giving some language for them to express it in the moment. But if you sort of think, the brain takes 24 years to reach maturity,
prefrontal cortex.
right? So before that's happening. So for our younger children, there's a lot of cognitive tools that we have that they don't have yet.
Yeah.
And we're there to try to provide some of that and supply some of that. So don't jump in with your limbic system in terms of the emotional. Jump in with the tools that you have.
You're right, Matthew. The modeling is the #1 place where they're going to get the concept of how to deal with the difficult emotions. So if you're in your car and someone cuts you off and you slam on the horn and you curse, well, you're just showing your child that's what we do when we're frustrated. And I think the narration that we talked about earlier can really play here in a way to help yourself. I know it helps me when I feel the blood is boiling and I'm going to lose it. I actually say now to Benji, I say, I am feeling at my limit. I'm feeling really frustrated right now, and I feel like I'm going to explode. I actually describe that feeling. My face is hot. I'm feeling flushed. I'm going to try and calm down. Actually, he tells me, now be calm, Mama, be calm.
Just hold on.
Having that vocabulary is very important.
Yep.
And being able to name the emotion is a huge part of that emotional growth mindset.
Yeah, and we're just trying to provide that stability. Again, not putting a particular negative label or spin on it. So, and if someone, if they haven't sort of accomplished or lived up to what they normally might do, it's about focus on the effort that they did make or the possibility that in the future it can be handled differently, as opposed to there's failure there.
Yes, it's a long journey.
Yeah, let's jump to a couple of questions. I know we've had a lot coming in that we haven't been able to get to. So this is from Josephine. So these are, we have a couple of questions related to language at home and when you have more than one language. So basically, my son is 3 years old. So this is Josephine, thank you. My son is 3 years old, and he's a dinosaur maniac. Yes, there are some of those in the world, aren't there? Yes. He is very much into anything dinosaur-related, clothes, books, toys, etc., the whole shebang. Not as interested into other subjects, okay? And one little piece there, dinosaurs have a lot of interesting features, and for that age, the bigger, the stronger, the more powerful. They're sort of captivated by limits. What's the limit of physical or possibilities? And so that's one element why they're attractive. Any suggestions though about making it broader for him, some broader exposure? So she's tried a few things, but not having a lot of success of getting off the dinosaur topic, and maybe he's probably built up a lot of amazing vocabulary.
Those long names.
Right.
We always say follow the child, Josephine, so I think it's important to support that interest in a balanced way. So, if he's interested in the names, well, borrow books, learn the names, learn their different habits, but then you can also, I think, expand into the animal kingdom.
Right.
Like
That's what I
I'm
was thinking
thinking
too.
Brontosaurus was an herbivore. Do you know there are other animals that are herbivores? Take a trip to the zoological gardens in Hong Kong. Is it open? I hope it's open.
Yes.
And let's go find other animals that we can see.
You can talk about the parts of the animal
herbivores.
too. Oh, this dinosaur has a horn. Do you know
has a
any?
tail.
Do you know any animals that live now that have? Or let me show you one. Talk about the different parts where they've lived.
Using
kind of
the child's interest as a springboard into other words like habitat or diet or.
So you'd start
behavior.
toward what they ate. So it'd be flora, fauna, plant, zoology, sort of moving that way.
And it's okay
and
if
see if you
he
can,
circles back to dinosaurs.
yeah,
And you can go on with that and then come out of it again. It's also an important social behavior, I think, to teach a child that in a conversation, it won't always go the way they want it to go, even though they really, really want to talk about dinosaurs.
yeah, okay. We can do another language development related
That's a
question
good
that we
question.
have, and then we have a couple questions coming in about the emotional sort of aspect, the emotional piece of it. And there's one other piece. We talked a little bit on growth mindset. Maybe if we can flesh that out a little bit, a little bit for people. So basically, what we're talking about is with anything your child is doing. This could be related to emotion. This could be related to an activity they're doing. It could be related to learning they're doing at school or what you're doing at home. The basic concept there is always, well, there's two pieces. One is to give more of a neutral sort of response to a child. If a child comes up and, look at this, like you were doing earlier with the picture, and I don't know if you've caught that, but I'd said, oh, this, I said, it's wonderful, it's very nice. Well, what do you think of it? Getting the child to reflect back rather than you being the evaluator of all things and them looking to you for praise. If you really emphasize in the way that you speak to your child that what's important for them or what they keep hearing from you is that I think you've done a good job. Good job, you've done wonderful, it's beautiful. Then they're going to keep looking for things that elicit that response in you, which means they're not going to challenge themselves. They're going to do things that they know that they can do well or things that they've done before that you gave a good response to. Okay? So instead, you want to flip that language around or sort of not use that language. Instead, you're going to talk about, I can tell you worked hard on this, or I can tell the effort you put in. What do you think about it? And you're going to give more of that neutral affect back to them and let them describe and let them work and focus on the effort part instead of just your positive response.
And also it's about building this idea that external feedback, while it's a large part of what we do, is not more important than how I feel about myself.
Right.
And that's a seed you want to plant from a very young stage by focusing on the process.
Yeah, and focusing on the process, and then it's going to be that struggling and being frustrated with something, that's a good thing. That means you've been challenging yourself.
Yes.
Right? The easy positive outcome that there's sort of short term and not really substantial reward in those kinds of activities.
So instead of good job, I like how you tried
right.
for so long, you didn't give up,
Right.
focusing on that effort.
Yeah. Okay, so a question from MCU, thank you. We use Cantonese at home and we worry that our child cannot comprehend English and Mandarin well after the summer break. So basically, probably in this case, a child probably here at, I think here at IMS, if I'm remembering correctly from MC, where basically they're in a dual language setting when they're at school. They're having English, they're having Mandarin. At home during the summer, Cantonese all of the time. So what's going to happen when they come back? Should one of us switch to English so she won't forget?
No.
Okay.
No,
Yeah.
stick to the language that you feel the most confident in. And usually that, even if you speak multiple language, that will remain your mother tongue.
Yeah.
It's the one you speak with the most articulation, the one that you can use more expressively, you have more adjectives, you speak more passionately, and it's your heart language, we say. That is the best foundation that you can give your child. And even if that is not a bilingual setting, the development of the native tongue is the fundamental piece for them to learn other languages actually later in life. So it's more important that they're getting a solid base in that language and the most enriched way from your mother tongue, rather than to try to create a bilingual setting for the sake of the bilingual setting. They're still in this, even though we've missed out on a couple months of school, they're still in this absorbent mind between 0 to 6. And so when they come back, they're going to bounce right back into, they're actually going to be thirsty for the language because they haven't had it for 6 months. I actually kind of want to be in the classroom when the children come back to see that, how they will go quietly to the materials because they're the desire is there, the hunger is there.
There's a lot of crossover in language development. So getting it really strong and getting an excellent environment. The quality of the language, whichever language it is the most important in terms of sort of stretching all of those neural pathways and elaborating, expanding all those neural pathways, which will then be used to interpret and make sense of the other language.
Yes.
So work on that, focus on that. If you have a natural bilingual setting where one of the two parents is fully bilingual or very comfortable in another language that you're wanting to expose to, then you can do that. But it is best that parent always speaks that language, the other parent always speaks the other language, and do that way. But again, it should be that sort of natural setting kind of way. Yeah.
I would also say, MC, you want to be careful not to switch all of a sudden. I know it comes from the best of intentions, but it may be very confusing to your child, actually, that all of a sudden your expressions have changed, the way you deal with emotion changes significantly when you move to another language.
Okay. So we have a few more questions and a bit of wrap up to do. If you can pause with us for just about 10 seconds, we have a bit of a technical obstacle to overcome.
Okay. When do you want to stick with the question?
Okay. I think it was our audio that we were just adjusting. I think you probably still had us on video. Okay, so a bit of a follow-up or related question from Young-kyung Kim. So, and this is, if there's one parent who has two languages that they can speak, we're talking English and Korean here. So the question is, should I speak English in the morning and Korean in the afternoon, or is that too confusing? And I think, as you can sort of tell from what we were saying before, that's probably too confusing. It's better, they're going to associate the language with the person they see. There's a lot of physical context that goes in on the language. So in terms of the code switching, which is that awareness of switching between language formats mentally, then it's going to be better if you pick the one language and stick with it.
Yes, the consistency.
I would, my personal way of looking at this is, if I was in an environment and I know they're going to get English at school a lot, then I would probably choose the Korean if I want the Korean.
If it's important.
Right, if it's important to you that they have that exposure, and just do Korean all the time is probably the way I do it. And know that they're going to have teachers, they're going to have friends that they're going to pick the English up with in another setting, and not to be too worried about that.
So here at school, in the Montessori environment, we do follow the one person, one language model. We find that is what works best with the children, so they understand that the Chinese teacher only speaks Mandarin to them all the time, and they have to get around it. They have to figure out the language, and they have to listen more carefully to the questions and the words that are coming from the Chinese teacher to understand it. And that's how they become bilingual. That code switching that Matthew talks about is a natural outcome of bilingual speakers. And it's okay if the child switches between languages, but the consistent output from the parent in one particular language will really help to build a diverse vocabulary, those idioms and metaphors that we use in our language, the expressions that we use, those nuances. That's very important to keep it consistent in that language.
Right. A follow-up question, which is, we read aloud at home and unavoidably read both English and Chinese. What's your advice on this? We just use English and Cantonese when reading. So in other words, I guess the framework here is that they're speaking in one of the two languages, or maybe one parent's speaking one and the other parent's speaking in the other. But when it comes to reading, then there's that temptation, or maybe the child is asking for, oh, can I pick this book and that one's Cantonese, and can I pick this book and that one's English? And so what do you do in that setting?
Just read the story, or tell the story that you think is happening in the language that you
now, if they both know, if they know both languages, okay. So even if they pick the Chinese book, and even though I can read the Chinese book, but I'm the English speaker.
Just say what you see.
then
I
still
see
do it
a
in English.
cow. The farmer's milking the cow. What is the farmer doing? How is the farmer feeling?
So you would even, in that case, say, well, if you want to hear it in Cantonese, then you can ask Dad to read it next time.
Sure.
And then I'm going to say it, but I'm just going to
Let's go find Dad
talk
to
about it
listen together.
Yeah, or another time.
So
okay.
the text is not necessarily important. You stick with your language.
Right. Okay. Okay, and so we have a question moving a little bit away from the language and back to language as it relates to emotional development. And this is Kai-Chin. Hi Kai-Chin. What can we do as parents if a child is so deep in their emotions? And we actually we haven't got to this point, but it's something that we wanted to talk about. So deep in their emotions that they do not want help, but actually seem like they want to stay in a problem situation. And I think we can, even as adults, sometimes we can get into a self-defeating place where we're feeling so bad about it that we just want it to be as bad as it can possibly be. So we almost feel validated for why we feel so bad. So needing to go to the bathroom but don't want to, but also don't want any help getting there. Okay, so if they're in that kind of cycle of...
So I would need to ask more questions. First, how old is the child? And I'm curious about how deep in their emotion, that observation. So try to observe from a non-judgmental standpoint. My guess is that I hear that your child is 4, so I think that it may be difficult for you to see her go through the struggle, but to try to really just observe what is happening from that non-judgmental framework. And then, like a little scientist, maybe you get a little notebook and document it, right? When I ask my child to go to the bathroom, this is what happens. And instead of using the word tantrum, what is it exactly that she's doing? Was she working on something? And then what is she saying to you? Being scientific about that approach. Yeah. And then I find, we're going to talk about this, so maybe I'll jump into it. I find that it helps sometimes to talk about a difficult situation in a storytelling format at another time. So we were talking about how you wouldn't do the grace and courtesy right when your child is interrupting you, when you're emotional about it. But to find a teachable moment, usually it's before bed in my household, where I talk about, today when Cameron took your ball, you really didn't like it and you screamed no at the top of your lungs. And I think you might have been, and this is where the sportscasting comes in, I think you might have been really annoyed with Cameron at that moment. I could see by the way you raised your voice, but here are some different ways to handle that. If that happens, you can use your words to tell Cameron, no, please give the ball back. And then that role play can come in.
Yeah, no easy answers to that question. In the moment, I think you're trying to stay as neutral as you can. It's probably not going to help to try to overpower the child in terms of, getting them to go to the bathroom, whatever it is. And I presume you're asking the question because none of that has worked anyway. So you would try to, as much as you can, siphon emotion out of the situation, not add in, and then also through your own body language, through your own tone of voice, you're in effect siphoning out. By giving some language, by naming it, you're also siphoning out the emotion from the situation. You're looking for prevention points for next time of trying to step in at the 2 instead of having it get to the 10. What's the easy off-ramp for them? Sometimes for a child, they'll be fine as long as they know that no one's watching them or no one's aware. You know what I mean? Like they get into that because there's something about the being watched, or that mom or dad are judging me or whatever it is. So you might need to find ways to sort of pretend that you're not noticing that they really need to go to the bathroom or whatever, and you're so there's some different sort of trial and error tricks that you would use to keep from getting that place the next time.
And that all comes from observation.
Right.
You have to observe carefully the behaviors.
And it's good to coordinate with your partner on that, or if you have a helper or grandparent at home, to coordinate with them of, with me, that, because sometimes, and that can help you to tease it out. Is it something that's more in the child, or is it about our relationship, my relationship with the child? Because maybe they only have that issue when it's with me. Okay,
Right.
so now I know it's something about our dynamic,
Right.
and it's not something else about, the physical part of toileting or whatever it is, depending on the situation. So,
And if you find yourself sort of spiraling into that out of control point, I think sometimes trying to remain calm can be difficult. And sometimes you need to remove yourself, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You need to excuse yourself and say, this is over. You can say, I'm feeling overwhelmed with this, so I'm going to walk away. I'm not sure, I don't know your child, but it could be, please observe, it could be that if she's getting a good reaction out of everyone by her going down that emotional hole,
Right.
then that's sort of feeding the behavior.
and that's
So
the
you wanna
siphoning part as much as you
remove-
can. Yep.
Remove yourself if you
Yep.
find yourself triggered by the emotion. I hope that helps.
Okay, and one last question I think that we'll take, because we're coming up close to the 1 hour mark here. But Stephanie Lay says, my child's mother's mother tongue is Cantonese.
Mm-hmm.
She has recently started learning Chinese characters in Mandarin at school. Now when she reads Chinese stories, she seems to confuse whether to say the Chinese word in Cantonese or in Mandarin.
Ooh, interesting question.
Okay.
So they're both correct, Stephanie. They're both correct. And I would not you could say it's said like this and it's also said like this. So my family is 我家, right? Or it's also 我的家. We can say it this way and we can also say it this way. And that's actually a very beautiful way to introduce diversity to a young child as well, that some people think this and some people think that. So that's very flexible thinking, growth mindset, as Matthew said.
Yeah. If you have a child where they're exposed to French at home and they have English at school, so when they start to learn the sounds that the letters make, again, there's that difference between those, and when they're trying to sound them out. So then there's going to be some of that would go on in that situation too.
Don't worry about the code switching.
Yeah, you sort of tend to roll with it. I would say, keep using your language for the one that you're
You've
using,
chosen,
whatever
yes.
you've chosen for you. If they're going on in Mandarin or they're sort of switching back and forth, you just sort of do that natural guidance of, would you like to read it the way that I read, using our language, using Cantonese, or would you like to do it the way that you do it at school in Mandarin?
Let's take turns.
And help them become aware of that, and then just go through with it. Shall we take another question or so? What would you say? One last one. Can we do one more
One
for those who
last
for those who would like to stay with us for another moment? Okay, and this is from Serena. Thank you, Serena. When applying the OPOL concept, okay, how do you keep your child talking the more difficult language when they observe the parent speaking in the easier language?
So, Serena,
Sorry, one parent, one language.
OPOL is one parent, one language. Yeah, it doesn't matter if the child switches between the languages. So if dad speaks French and mom speaks Mandarin, and the child speaks English, that's okay. Just be consistent. And this is the tricky part, is when you're speaking to your child in Mandarin and they respond to you in English, being consistent about that. The language you have chosen is very important. And that is what forces them to think, stop, and listen to the language that you...
And so you've said it in Mandarin, they answer you in English, and you do?
My Mandarin is not good enough to role play that, but you continue repeating the question. Maybe you're using hand gestures, body movements, maybe you're pointing it out. You stay consistent with that language. Let them...
You would almost be, back at the beginning of the talk when we were talking about stumbling over the toddler, and, me went, and you say, oh, I went to the... So they could say it in English, give their response in English. You could mirror it back in Mandarin or whichever language it is that you're speaking.
That's right.
So they're hearing it, and then they realize that, okay, and you keep going on it. And so, I mean, again, there's a bit of nuance there. You're not trying to be really obtuse with your child about it. when they're trying to communicate, they're trying to say something to you, but you're just reinforcing that this is the language that we're communicating in. And at the beginning, when a child comes into a new classroom, let's say they know English, they're speaking to the English teacher, they don't know Mandarin, the Mandarin teacher always speaking Mandarin. Yeah, the first week or so, maybe if they're very emotionally unsettled in the class, they might gravitate towards, the English-speaking teacher because it's just familiarity and everything else is different. But eventually they want to have that relationship with the other teacher, and that's more important to them than the obstacle of the language. And so similarly, as long as, with the parents, as long as you're sort of consistent and sort of have your way of making that work, as we described with that dialogue back and forth, it will balance out and they'll realize, okay, I can have success here. Now, of course, the best thing is when you have the grandparent who only speaks the one language, right?
Yes.
And they know that they have to, because it's always hard when they know that you can understand the other.
And I would say don't expect the articulation and the expression in that
and that's
we call
fine.
less dominant language to come out at age 3, 4, 5, I would say even 6. But in the second plane, between 6 to 12, if you travel, or when we travel again, or if you're seeing the grandparents who only speak that particular language, that is when you notice and you realize they've been listening all along. So it's really worth it to try and stick with that OPOL.
Yeah, and you do have to just accept that there's not going to be as much output in that other language for now. When you're there. But hopefully there's a lot going in, and you can always think, oh, there's 10 times more in there than I'm hearing out. So great. Okay, so we're going to finish there for today. We'll try to answer some of your questions online after for those pressing ones or ones that we may not have addressed today. Thank you very much for spending the time with us. As I said, June 4th, we will have our next Surviving and Thriving session. It will be on motor and sensory development, but especially what to do with your young, active child, wire that way, how do we manage that, and how do we sort of build that up as part of their growth and development. And
we have a resource to share
we have
with
some
you.
resources,
Alicia Eaton, who wrote the book, Words That Work, How to Get Your Child to Do Anything, I think is the title.
Yep.
She wrote this book. It's a very simple parent handbook about how to speak to your child in a way that helps them to do what you want, basically. And it's a great, wonderful book. She's an AMI educator, actually, and a therapist. And so it's written in a way that parents can easily understand. We have a 3-page cheat sheet from her book, and we will share that with you. Highly recommend you look at some of those tips.
Okay. And then okay. All right. So that's it for our resources, and thank you again for joining us, and we will see you next time.
On June 4th.
June 4th.
Thank you.
Thank you.